Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host. And today I'm going to recount to you my experiences in Delhi. As you all know, that I was in India on a 3-week tour. I visited many cities, Hyderabad, New Delhi, Aurangabad, Pune, and Mumbai. And my best experience was, at least from an intellectual perspective, was in New Delhi. And I got a taste of India's strategic culture. So what I'm going to do today is first going to recount to you all the think tanks and the universities that I visited, the topics I discussed, the individuals that I met, and the impressions that they left on me. And then towards the end, I will make some observations about what I have noticed about the Indian strategic culture. This is not going to be like a research presentation. I will hopefully in the near future write a short piece on India's strategic culture that I experienced and I noticed. But meanwhile, consider this as reflections on my basically 4 days, six lectures, six events tour of New Delhi. I was there from the 24th till the 27th of January. And not only did I go to 3 think tanks, I went to 2 universities and had a public engagement with Delhi's intellectuals and scholars and public intellectuals. And I also met with a lot of people from the civil society, from ambassadors, retired generals, people who are in the civil services. So I got a pretty good idea. I mean, in that short period, I got a much better sense of India's strategic thinking with regards to its foreign policy and its national security policies. So, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go event by event, but I will talk a little bit about the strategic culture, what it is in the beginning, and then towards the end. But before I do all of that, if you haven't subscribed to Khanversation yet, please subscribe to Khanversation, like this video, press the bell icon. And if you are interested in supporting Khanversations, you can even become a member. The button to become a member, it's called join. To join Khanversations is right next to the button to subscribe. So my first visit was to Vivekananda International Foundation. But prior to that, let me just share with you a couple of articles which have been published about India's strategic culture. In 1992, a RAND scholar and policy analyst called George Tanham visited India. And after about several visits over a period of 4 to 5 months, he wrote an article, an interpretive essay about India's strategic culture. Basically, he argued that there is no Indian strategic culture. It's very shallow. There is no long-term thinking. There are no common themes. And so there is no strategic thought, nor is there a strategic culture. I mean, the article itself is not very great if it was published. If it went to a refereed journal, it would have got a lot of critique as to what does he mean by strategic culture? What does he mean by strategic thought? Those things are not very clear. But basically, what strategic thought is the ideas, the historical ideas, the values, the perceptions of what are the elements of national interest and national security, which are widely shared in a country. All of that is part of the strategic thought and the goals of the country, its ambitions. Like, for example, India, from the very beginning, wanted to be a great power, and its founders have always talked about India taking the rightful place. So you could argue that the desire to become a world power and play an important role in world politics has been a congenital issue with India. By birth, India has sought to be a major power. So that is part of India's strategic culture. So ideas, values, goals, aspirations, capabilities, these are all part of strategic thought. Now, what is strategic culture is, at least Tanham doesn't make it very clear, but strategic culture is slightly different. It is the kind of ways in which discussions take place, in the way people think about national security, the way they go about making foreign policy and national security policy, the words, the ideas, the justifications that they use to advance specific interests. All of that is part of strategic culture, especially the institutions that make up for it. So that is what we are trying to look at, and that is what I had in my mind when I went to New Delhi, to get a sense of India's strategic culture, how is policy made, and how do Indian strategic thinkers think about. I mean, I've read some people like C. Raja Mohan and Dr. Jaishankar and some very prominent Indian scholars, but that was not enough. This was a great opportunity for face-to-face interaction with some of the important voices in Delhi. So my first visit on the 24th of January in the morning was to the Vivekananda International Foundation, which is an important independent think tank. It is reputed to be very close to the Modi government because it was initially founded by Ajit Doval, who has for the last nearly 10 years been the national security advisor of the Prime Minister of India. And he played a key role in its establishment. I was also quite impressed with the resources that the Vivekananda International Foundation clearly has. It has a wonderful building. To have a building like that in Delhi is absolutely fantastic. So I don't know whether it's rented or owned, but it shows that they have a lot of resources. And the people who came to the talk were very impressive. There were several retired generals and ambassadors and scholars. I had the opportunity, my session was chaired by Ambassador Arvind Gupta, who was the Deputy National Security Advisor of India, and he has held many important positions, including the directorship of IDSA, an important government think tank in New Delhi. General Ravi Sohani was there, General Atta Hasnain. Many of you are very familiar with him. He has been on this show. He's very, very famous in India. And also Ambassador Arun Singh, who had some really tough questions to ask of me, and researcher Dr. Sweta Kumari, who is an expert on American studies. Actually, she studies America, and that was very interesting. So what happened at this was I spoke about the US grant strategy and India's place in it. And it was interesting. It talked a lot about American foreign policy, and it was a fair and, shall we say, free dialogue. And I was quite candid. I did not pull my punches where I was critical of the US, neither did I pull my punches where I was critical of India. And the questions were tough, and they were not just questions, they were comments and observations. And so I guess they benefited from my discussion, and I learned a lot from their questions and their comments. It was very interesting that they clearly had a very clear vision of what they think is India's national security and national interest. And they also felt that they knew, at least that they had clarity on how India could pursue this given its limited interests. But what was also interesting is that at the end of it, I remember, well, I will not identify names. One of the important participants there observed that it was apparent that there's more that India can learn about the US. And I also felt that it is very important for the United States and its policymakers and members of its strategic community to listen more carefully to what Indians are saying. It appears that Americans are pursuing whatever they want to pursue, independent of what India is saying about US-India relations. And while Indians are also pursuing their national interests, they probably are not fully understanding what the US is expecting of them. That was in the morning, and it was an interesting experience, needless to say. And then in the afternoon, I went to JNU. So this was kind of right of center to supposedly far left center, far left of center. And so I spoke at the Jawaharlal Nehru's University School of International Studies. For this, I'm extremely grateful to my friend, Professor Sanjay Bhardwaj, who's the Director of South Asian Studies at JNU, and also the Dean, Dr. Shrikant Kondapalli, who is the Dean of the School of International Studies at JNU. He's a very prominent and famous scholar. Sanjay himself is probably the most important scholar in the world on India-Bangladesh relations, and anything and everything that has got to do with Bangladesh. Sanjay is the guy to go to. So I had a good chance. I spoke, it was like a formal seminar. There were lots of students. At one point, there were about 80 people I counted, graduate students and faculty who attended the event. but it was fascinating. I mean, I spoke about US-India relations. A lot of it is from my book, India as a Rising World Power, the ebook that I edited a few months ago. It is freely available, and I will share a link to that ebook in the description of this video for those of you who are interested in reading that book. It is free, so you don't have to worry about paying. It was published by the New Lines Institute in Washington, D.C. But after I finished my discussion, what was surprising to me was that unlike at the Vivekananda International Foundation, where there was discussions and an appreciation for some of the insights I shared, I found that most of the responses came from the faculty and not from the students as much. And maybe there wasn't enough time for the Q&A. So it was basically the dialogue was dominated by faculty. And I found that the faculty were actually more defensive of the government's policies. To me, that was very surprising because I went there thinking that JNU has a reputation for being radical and and very anti-establishment. But I found at least the faculty very pro-establishment, and rather than engage with me, they were more interested in explaining and defending the government's policies as right policies, especially when I was a bit critical about India's neighborhood first policy, and I said it was not as successful, and so they were trying their best to convince me that the foreign policy was quite successful of the present government. I did interact with the students informally subsequently, and I met some very smart students. And Pawan Chowdhury, for example, stands out. He was very nice. He even picked me up from the airport, drove me around, and I learned a lot about the politics of the students there. And after the formal session over a cup of tea, I did have an informal sessions with the students of JNU. And I must say, regardless of what the politics is with regards to that university, the students were smart, brilliant. I heard some of the topics that they are pursuing in their dissertations and their research. Yes, a lot of these were people who are working in South Asia, but it was very, very impressive. So it was a very interesting day for me on the 24th of January. I went to a major think tank, and I went to perhaps one of the most important universities in South Asia and met with their students. It was quite intellectually, shall we say, empowering and thrilling for me to engage with the students there. The next day, I went and spoke at the ORF Foundation, which is probably India's most prominent think tank. It hosts the Raisina Dialogue, and their participants are everywhere from Davos to Munich. And I interacted there with their researchers, and especially with Kabir Taneja, and of course, the very famous and celebrated Pakistan expert Sushant Sareen. The topic at ORF was the failure of political Islam. I was making the argument as to how in over 150 years, political Islam had failed, at least in the Sunni part of the world, failed to achieve its goal to establish Islamic states and revive Islamic culture and vitality and Islamic sciences and Islamic economics. And so we talked a bit more about the various kinds of Islamic movements that exist in the Muslim world and what their goals are, what their ideas are, what is the level of their success or failures. It was like a small workshop. There was a lot of engagement, lots of questions, and it was for me also quite enlightening. I mean, the questions that were asked of me also gave me a good insight into perhaps the dialogues that are taking place in India. So it was a good opportunity, especially meeting both Kabir and Sushant. I look forward to interacting with them a bit more in the near future. That afternoon, then I went to the Islamic Studies Department of Jamia Islamia. There I talked about my book, Islam and Good Governance, and basically talked about the concept of ihsan, which means to do beautiful things, and how that can be brought into into the governance. So, what would be good governance in the light of the concept of Ihsan? I am very grateful to the faculty there, Dr. Iqtidar Khan, Dr. Maulana Mushtaq Tijawari, and Dr. Junaid Harris, who really treated me to a wonderful lunch, and then went on to first host me for a pre-seminar dialogue, and then also a post-seminar dialogue. We were also joined by important journalists like Mr. Iqbal, and then also IS officers like Muhammad Ahsan Abid, who participated in the post seminar dialogues as well as in the dialogue itself. I found the students very interesting. There were a lot of students there, mostly Islamic studies, master's and PhD students. I was delighted to meet Dr. Dar, who just got his PhD. He had already read my book and reviewed it in an important journal. So for me, that was quite a thrill to actually meet people who have read the book and published. I also met a student called Dishta. I forget her name now. It means direction. Dishta, I think, and she already she had a copy of my book, and she had read the book, and so it was very nice to meet several students who had read the book, and were willing to engage with my ideas, and to me that was quite important. The next day was the 26th of January, and I unfortunately was not able to get access to the celebrations and the parade, and so I enjoyed what little I could about Delhi. I had dinners with a friend. We went to Nizamuddin, and that was also very nice. I got to meet with the Sajjad Nashin of the Nizamuddin. They were preparing for a visit by the French President Macron, but nevertheless, I got to go inside into the sanctum sanctorium and etc. So it was for me an interesting experience. I am a big fan of Nizamuddin Aulia's ideas and his teachings, and so it was okay for, and also to Amir Khusro. So it was a good opportunity for me to pay my respects to them. Uh, the next day, on the 27th, I spoke about the Quad and the Indo-Pacific strategy at a small think tank called Center for the Study of Plural Societies. That session was led by Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, who's been ambassador to several countries, including, I think, Sweden and Kazakhstan, and Dr. Sumaya Ahmed from the Hamdard University. It was a very interesting dialogue, and I found it very interesting that there are so many think tanks. I mean, I saw a very well-funded think tank like ORF and VIF, and then I also got to go to CSPS, which is like a boutique think tank, which is essentially clearly trying to understand the importance of pluralism in contemporary democratic politics. It was wonderful talking to them. I also enjoyed the fact that some of the people who watch Khanversations did attend this particular seminar, and you can see that I'm sharing their photographs in this. I do not want to identify them by name, but it was very nice to meet. Everywhere when I went, I met people who watch Khanversations, and that was to me quite satisfying. And the fact that they appreciate it and are able to take the time off from work or from their schools to come and attend. In fact, one or two people actually flew to Hyderabad from Delhi and Bangalore to attend some of my seminars there, who are subscribers of Khanversations. So thank you very much. So my last event after the CSPS dialogue, which was very interesting. I mean, Ambassador Sajjanhar was quite thoughtful in his engagement, and all the participants there, especially the young scholars there, were curious, had very tough questions. One of my friends, Dr. Bharti Chibar from Delhi University, also had attended that seminar, and it was wonderful to reconnect with her. In the afternoon, I went to New Horizons School where Dr. Salim Pidwai had arranged a meeting with some of the luminaries of the Muslim community of New Delhi. I met some former IS officers, current IS officers. I met people who are engaged in improving education in New Delhi. I also met some young people who are engaged in community service. I met a historian, Ubaid Rahman, for example, who writes lots of books on Muslim history of India. So to me, the whole experience of Delhi was fascinating. I mean, it was deserving the intellectual activity. Hyderabad is also pretty good, but the intensity and the quality of intellectual engagement in Delhi uh, not less than what I had expected. I enjoyed the discussions in Hyderabad too, and you can see I have already posted. In fact, the recording that about my trip to Hyderabad, I actually did it while I was in Delhi on the 26th of December, and I will have it. You can get it at the end of this video if you want to, or if you have not watched the video about my Hyderabad engagements. There too, in 8 days, I spoke at 6 different places. So now to go back and what did I find about India's strategic culture? So India's strategic culture, I think the two Rand Corporation scholars who compared it, they were probably using the United States strategic culture as a benchmark and comparing it indirectly. And so what they find in the US and they didn't find in India, they were highlighting it. One observation that was made was that India was more about past and present and wasn't thinking about future, but that was not the case. I think that a lot of Indians sense that India is on the verge of a significant future. India is about to become a major power player in the world. India is on the verge of getting the seat that it has been seeking for 75 years. And so they are very much focused on the future. The Indian strategic community, primarily, as I saw it, consists of ex-military, ex-diplomats, professors, and journalists. These are the four, and this is what you can say constitute U.S. the strategic environment too. You have the military, the former State Department people, diplomats, the policy community, academia, and media. I also met some young policy wonks for example, Sweta Kumari at the Vivekananda International Foundation, Kabir Taneja, who's already established his reputation at ORF, Sumaya Ahmed at CSPS, and so I did meet Uzair Khan at JNU. So I met a lot of young scholars and policy thinkers coming up. And I think that in another 10 years, there will be important voices in India's strategic thinking. I think one reason is that because of the nature of India's political system, because it's a Westminster model, a lot of policy work is done in the bureaucracies. And so the Ministry of External Affairs plays a big role, along with the Prime Minister's office, in making policy and articulating what is the national interest. And people are unwilling to engage with the government critically. I found that in Indian scholars and professors, especially when they are here in the US, they kind of talk as if they are ambassadors of India. So rather than sharing their research and their perspective on Indian foreign policy and India's role, they explain India's foreign policy and also try to justify it as valid and authentic and other ways. So I think that is an aspect of Indian strategic culture, which is different from America, where scholars are more individualistic. American scholars are more interested in advancing their personal contribution to thinking their vision of what America's national interest is or ought to be. And they often tend to be more critical of the government than I found Indian scholars and policymakers to be. I also think that because the retirement age in India is relatively low, I think everybody retires from their services by the age of 60. So they have intellectual life left. And so a lot of these think tanks, etc., are populated by former military and former diplomats. And so I think that is the second thing that I notice about Indian structure. But I can tell you that a lot of Indian critical thinking is or foreign policy thinking, security thinking is dominated by the realist thought. I rarely came across people advancing, say, a feminist perspective on foreign policy, or a constructivist or a liberal vision. So realist thinking is predominant among even the academics as well as the policy thinkers. So you can argue that there is an Indian strategic culture which is very realistic, and that with the emergence of more and more think tanks, you can see that while at the moment the universe of strategic thinkers is smaller, say compared to the US, but it is rapidly expanding. I spoke at 3 think tanks in Delhi. I also spoke at think tanks in Hyderabad. And so you can see that there are think tanks not just in the capital city, but all over the country. So the Indian strategic culture is emerging. And as India's power grows, its state's capacity grows, and the corporate sector gets more involved in funding think tanks, independent think tanks, I think you will see a very rich strategic culture emerging out of India, especially now that India is engaged in many strategic activities, the Indo-Pacific, patrolling the Arabian Sea, and also engaging with the West as well as with Russia. And of course, trying to meet the challenge of China. So as India's strategic demands increase, strategic institutions will emerge, and a strategic culture will definitely emerge. I also had a good time interacting with a lot of people who you might have seen on Khanversations. I met with Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed and his friends who were all former ambassadors. We had a great dinner at the India International Center. I'm extremely grateful for him for introducing me to so many important voices, and I learned a lot from them over dinner. I also met with Ambassador Ketan Shukla and his wonderful wife. They hosted me for a wonderful dinner, and that was an interesting experience. I also, of course, met Lieutenant General Atta Hasnain at the Vivekananda International Foundation, and I'm extremely grateful to him. I learned a lot from his comments were also quite interesting in his response. And then I also met people like Muhammad Ahsan Abed and Ubaidur Rahman, voices in the Urdu, shall we say, cultural environment, the IAS sector, public service. So for me, it was a wonderful experience. I learned a lot, and I hope that my learning and my experience in Delhi and Hyderabad and my firsthand, shall we say, encounter with India's strategic thought will enrich my future conversations and also engagements on conversation and my research and my work. So I hope you found this this kind of diary type of conversation interesting and thought-provoking. And if you have not yet subscribed to Khanversations, please subscribe to Khanversation, like this video, press the bell icon so that you get notifications. If you want to support Khanversations, join Khanversations by clicking the button to join, and continue to watch for Khanversations. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Be happy, be safe, take care.